Oh, whoops.
Hello, hello. Glad to see I'm not the only one sitting mostly in the dark. I'd welcome those present to turn on your cameras if you're able, so that we can have a discussion and see who's in the room. And I think we might just make a start, even though we're a small group at the moment. And first, I'll acknowledge that I'm joining from unceded Djadja country and pay my respect to elders past and present and any First Peoples with us tonight, and would invite you to put whose country you're joining from in the chat as well, so we know where everybody's coming from. A point particularly salient as we come together to talk about land, because for those of us who are farming here, if we're not Indigenous, we are farming on unceded lands of others. And we know that we're also struggling to not only to return land to its original owners, but also to those who would like to live in good relations with land and care for it in better ways. So that's what the Agrarian Trust kind of work is really speaking to directly. I'm through Tammi with AFSA. I'm just going to very quickly say where we've come from to tonight's conversation, and then I'm actually going to hand over to Michele Sabto, who has been chairing the process for an Agrarian Trust here in Australia. We have been working on the land problem for a very long time, and if you're not familiar with our work previously, we have farming on other people's land has been a project we started about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years maybe, to encourage land sharing and other kind of community-based solutions to getting more people onto land to grow food in harmony with nature. And that project has gone really well. We actually know of several land sharing agreements around Australia now, where we didn't really know of any when we started the program. And we have a land sharing agreement like template for people to use who are thinking about doing that sort of thing. Here on our farm on Djadja country, we are land sharing as well with some market gardeners and we grow cattle and pigs. And now we turn the corner to, well, okay, how can we take this to a bigger community of people? Not everybody has land to share, and not everybody can access the people who were in that position. So what would be another move forward in the question of getting more farmers on small scale farmers onto land? That's where the Agrarian Trust comes in. And Michele's been leading the process that I'll let her explain, actually, about trying to work out what the governance model and the ownership model is going to be for an Agrarian Trust here. There's been one in America for several years, and that was the basis of our original research. I think I will just hand it over now, Michele, because you're going to lead us through a process of what are we trying to get to next stage? Well, what's happened to date with the Agrarian Trust and what's going on next? Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Tammi. Yes, so for those of you here who aren't familiar with what the working group has settled on as, I guess, key features of this Agrarian Trust, basically we're looking to set up an organisation that will acquire and hold and steward agricultural land and provide long-term secure access to farmers to farm that agroecologically. I think that's pretty, and protect it in perpetuity as farmland. And also we are, in our vision, is to provide housing for the farmers on that land if it's required. So I think that pretty much encapsulates what we're trying to do. And as Tammi said, the model that we started with was the Agrarian Trust in the USA, which has been doing this now for, I think it's around 5 years, and they have acquired 8 properties. Oh, sorry, the one key feature I didn't include there was place-based governance. So the idea is to have a peak body and then regional commons. So you might have, say, a commons on the Mornington Peninsula where I live, and that commons would be the one that stewards the properties on the Mornington Peninsula, whereas there would be a commons in central Victoria that would steward the properties in Victoria. So that's the other aspect, is place-based governance. So yeah, in the States, they've acquired around 8 properties already, and they're doing some really interesting things on those properties, providing secure access for farmers to farm regeneratively or nature positively on those farms. They're also in some cases providing housing, although as I understand it, the model in states doesn't necessarily hasn't got a housing focus. But I think when the working group started talking about what was important in the Australian context, it seemed to us that providing housing for the farmers where they were farming was very important. So we included that in our vision statement, which is published on AFSA's website. So because there are many ways to skin a cat in terms of legal structures for something like this, we eventually decided on a plan where we would engage a law firm and a project coordinator to come up with 3 alternative legal structures for this project. So a structure for the peak entity, a structure for the regional entity, and then AFSA would pick its final structure out of those 3. So we needed money because law firms are expensive, and we needed money to engage the coordinator to run this legal structuring phase. So we applied to a private NGO, which is conservation-based, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Trust. And that was basically because I've got experience with that philanthropic, and they have provided funds for a long-term biolink project on the peninsula where I work, and I already had a relationship with them, so I thought we would submit that funding application, and we asked for $43,000 to run an 18-month setup stage, at the end of which we would have picked our legal model. We would have our founding documents, our constitution, etc. We would have appointed our office holders, and we'd be ready to start acquiring land. So unfortunately, we didn't get that grant. So now we're in a situation where we are thinking about where to go next. I'm really hopeful that the Collective Brains Trust at this meeting can help with where we're at. So that's basically, yeah, the long and short of it.
That's great,
Yeah.
Michelle. I actually think it'd be useful. It's great that Gordon just introduced yourself there, and I'd love to hear maybe from the others who've come, how many are landholders or land seekers or policymakers, or maybe there's a philanthropist in the room who's like, I've come along to fund an agrarian trust. Wouldn't that be brilliant? Oh, that's surely Ben, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry, no, Ben's on our committee and not going to give us anything except a lot of free labor. Very good intellectual labor. Gordon, actually, since you've done a small introduction there, would you like to say a bit more about your kind of interest in the topic, and then we'll maybe go around if that's all right with people?
Yes, certainly. Gordon from Bunbury. I'm a convener for the Greens in the Forest electorate, and we're currently reviewing our water and agricultural policies, which are pretty good anyway, but in our early campaigning engagement with recruitment and so forth, we're getting a lot of feedback about the current dynamic around the agriculture, the state of agriculture in Southwest WA. Very alarming things, and we want to put in place good policy that presents lots of options above and beyond the status quo, which is really not very good.
Yep, fair enough. The policy platforms in place in Australia are definitely not very good for protecting agricultural land or for helping people get onto it to farm, especially small scale farmers. So, yep, you're not wrong there. And I would imagine, although AFSA does a lot of that policy work, like our Legal Defence Fund, for example, because we do a lot of supporting individual farmers, what that has done is really help AFSA as an advocacy body build this, the People's Food Plan, knowing what people need. When you start to see lots of people have the same problem, then you have an idea what to do in a policy direction. And the Agrarian Trust will build that kind of knowledge too around land ownership and control.
Yes, the person I'm working with is Declan McGill, who I believe people on
Oh,
this.
you're working with Dec. Yeah, Dec interned here on our farm a million years ago.
Yeah, he mentioned that, and so I'm working with Declan at the moment to review these policies, and he said, look, you've got to get along to this Zoom, and
Fantastic.
it's a great alternative way at looking at the whole agricultural dynamic.
That's great. Oh, that's great. You'll have to tell him hello for me.
I will.
Joe, you're the only other non-AFSA person that I can see with a screen, so I'm picking on you next.
No worries. Hi, I am one of the many, I guess, with long-term, or feels like it will be long-term aspirations to I guess, have access to land to grow and farm. Currently actually in Sweden, so it's sunny here, hence the great light that I'm in.
I was wondering.
But returning to Australia soon, and I guess I'm feeling my way out in the what is going on, I guess in the policy space and in the world of, I guess, facilitating the growing of food, and people's access to land and obviously food sovereignty, to find my own place in that ecosystem, if it's not growing food directly myself.
Yep. Great. Good to have you here. Thanks.
No worries.
Ben, do you want to introduce yourself and then we'll move on to non-AFSA?
Sure. Hi, my name's Ben. I'm on Wurundjeri country. And my interest is sort of going towards land. So I've been thinking a lot about these sort of issues lately, and especially looking at some international examples. And the one that I'm sort of most excited about at the moment that I would highly recommend anyone to have a look at is the Scotland land reform debate going on. And especially something that's really, really cool over there is they have a thing called a community right to buy. And I haven't looked too much into it, but essentially my understanding of it is their crofting communities can compulsory purchase land, and then they also have a separate one where both urban and rural communities can sign up. So if the land goes on the market, they basically have first right away of purchasing that piece of land. So I think there's a lot of opportunities and ways to do this overseas that I'm really excited about.
So is that the one in Scotland, is it a bit like Safair in France, where the communities can have a say in the purchase of that land?
I'm not too familiar exactly on that one.
Right, okay.
So
We'll pop up a link to it. There are a couple of good examples overseas, and I should also say, like, land reform in this country sounds like an impossible task. Like, we're looking at an agrarian trust as a solution for communities to come together, find funding and do these sort of things. But actually, the longer vision is genuine land reform in terms of policy and who's allowed to own it and how much they're allowed to own, and what they're allowed to do with it, I guess. And while that sounds like an impossible task in a very neoliberal state like Australia, it's like, I think of it like, when's the right time to plant a tree? Yesterday. When's the next best time? Right now. And so land reform is going to take a really long time. So we better start on the campaign for that now, because it's going to take ages. Dick Copeman, I've got you next on my screen if you'd like to introduce yourself. Also, by the way, I'm saying this, but if for some reason people feel shy, you can just say so.
Yeah, good day. Sorry, I was eating my dinner.
That's all right. It is dinner time.
Look, I got into this because been involved in this space indirectly through permaculture and Northeast Street City Farm in Brisbane, but also from being a retiree with a bit of spare cash. Not a philanthropist by any means, but more looking for whether there's some way in which people with us with a few 100,000 could put it into some sort of joint fund that and not particularly wanting any return on it, but maybe wanting to be able to have access to the capital down the track if we needed it. But in the meantime, it could be funding the sort of initiatives that are being talked about here. So really supporting the idea from my past experience, but also with you know, my mid-70s now and health beginning to be affected a bit, just sort of a bit of spare cash, wanting to know what to do with it, and seeing if there's some way in which a mechanism like this could provide somewhere for people at my stage of life to park their funds, but be able to access them, not get a huge return on them at any time, but get the capital back or part of it if we needed it later on. So that's really my interest. Yeah.
Thanks, Dick. That's super helpful, and I agree. There's I think people in your position are probably, unlike a lot of philanthropic groups, more likely to be a source of understanding the enoughness of what you have, and that you could share it for a period of time, or you know, for a longer time, so that everyone in future has enough. And finding a mechanism for that, I think, is part of what we're trying to find funding to do this governance model and the funding model. Like, what does it look like? And I think that's a really interesting possibility. There's so many people out there who would like to do something with the little bit they have, without seeking some huge return. So thanks, that's great.
So I think one of the things that I always say when I'm talking to people who are saying, well, how are you going to get this land, is that there are I think one of the most interesting ways that land's been acquired by the US Agrarian Trust, and is that they have a retiring farmer there who didn't want to move off farm, didn't want to see the family farm become lifestyle properties and transition out of farming permanently. And so basically donated the family farm, or a portion of the family farm, because I think there was a pre-existing subdivision on it, to the Agrarian Trust in the USA, and retained a life tenancy on that farm as part of that donation. So it was a win-win situation, obviously, for the Agrarian Trust, who got the land. And it was a good outcome for the donor, because they got to continue living on a farm, to see a working farm around them. And obviously that land donation doesn't have to be an outright donation. It could be a sale to the trust at an under market value, and then the trust raises the funds for the difference, for example. So I guess I raised that just because there are so many ways to bring funds and land into an entity like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we first started Fupa, we actually heard a lot about farms in WA doing what you're talking about, but not through any kind of collective effort with Agrarian Trust, but more like individual people with properties as they're aging, not wanting to leave, and then kind of bringing young farmers under the wing, and essentially then willing it to them because they didn't have children who wanted it. So we heard of a few examples like that over there. I don't know, Gordon, if you've heard of anything like it.
Indeed, I could talk about that a lot. Some of the downside of what's happening in, say, the dairy industry in southwest WA is you have a lot of aging farmers who are wanting to leave their properties. There's no young people to come in and take their place, because they're all doing FIFO up north to earn the big bucks so they can buy their house. And so you've got these farmers who have big land holdings, want to move out, and so farmers aren't wanting to come into an industry that's not going very well, because they're under the thumbs of the Coles Woolly duopoly. There's no profit there, they can't make a living. So they just want to get out, they'll sell it to anyone. So it's the people who are buying up the land certainly don't have agriculture applications in their thinking at all, far from it in many cases. So there are a lot of farmers who, just hearing what you've said so far in southwest WA, who could fall really neatly into this sense of offering some of their land, maintaining their right to live on the land, the whole lot or part, it just seems like a no-brainer, which could
Yeah, I
work.
know. It's a matter of reaching them, collectivizing them, sort of bringing them into the thinking
Yeah.
of this.
Well,
Yeah,
we're actually doing this right now in terms of reviewing our agricultural policies. We're actually engaging directly with the dairy farming industry in Southwest WA. And the big party government's not listening to them. They're looking for an alternative. And for some, this could be a way.
yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's great, Gordon. That's really good to hear.
Yeah. You should have a chat to Declan when you get a chance. He's so across this stuff.
Yeah, right. Well, he doesn't turn up to these things. He tells you to come, but I don't see him here. Mel comes sometimes, but Dec rarely does.
I can send you his contact info if you want to catch up.
Yeah, no, I've still got it. I will. Yeah, I'll
Ah.
give him a call. Yeah, we're still in contact.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Lijen, would you like to have a word about what you're doing here, what you're offering or seeking?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's actually my first time come to this session. Something certain about me, I'm a postdoc research fellow from QT. And my research areas focus on land use planning, food agri-food systems, as well as the policy analysis intersecting these two areas. I'm also wearing another hat, which is the AFSA state leader for Queensland and New South Wales. So AFSA is for Australian Food Innovation Network, and been working with Future Food Systems CRC. Not sure if any of you have heard of that, as well as CSIRO in terms of the innovation works we can help with or establish in terms of this food system areas. And my recent trip to Coffs Harbour, it's really relevant to many of you just talked about before, like aging population for farmers, which is quite striking, as well as the hardship they experience in that region, like how they could not survive funding. There's issue, and also, of course, the permit, dealing with different government agencies. It just simply sometimes they're trying to diversify the business from farming to a bit more elements, something like business aspect, like an agritourism model, but it just becomes really struggling with all these different permits imposed on them. So yeah, I've just come across this session. I thought, I'm really interested to see what's happening in these areas, to see what I can do or maybe learn from everyone, especially from hearing the voice from your aspect. I think it will be really powerful to see, how I can expand my research. My previous research primarily focused on urban, but I think, as we all know, Australia is such a highly urbanized areas, and farmer is actually essential part of that. So yeah, so hopefully I can learn more things from you guys.
Yeah, great.
From
Great
me.
to have researchers here too. Thanks, Lijen. And yeah, Jess has just popped a link in there for, if you haven't seen it, the People's Food Plan is a huge policy document that AFSA updated last year. And there's a whole section on land use planning and water use as well. So lots of policy ideas in there.
Yeah,
Jordan.
it's a shame. I just want to say it's a shame that there's the recent parliamentary inquiry about making a new national food plan, but it's just been unpromising. I mean, they promised so much, but nothing really has happened. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Yeah, thanks for the link.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in the federal processes, I'm not going to lie. And they don't control land use planning for the most part either. The states do. So we engage much more heavily in the state processes than, we always put submissions into federal inquiries, but the state ones, I think, are where you can actually make an impact. And obviously local government areas too, with their individual planning schemes. Jordan K just left. So How about Jordan Bond instead? Do you want to? Good to see you, Jordan.
Hey, how you doing?
You?
Yeah, so I'm Jordan. I'm just a student studying through Lismore, studying the Bachelor of Science with a specialisation in Regen Ag. We don't really touch on many social issues in the degree, and this is just something I'm really interested in. So tuning in to hear a bit more about this.
Great. Well, you'll be glad to know that we're going to be there in October on the Agroecology Roadshow.
I did see that, yeah.
Yeah. So we've got to stop in Lismore. We just had a meeting with everyone today. We're going to be at Namabunda and then do something in Lismore that night. So watch for details.
Thank you.
All right. Welcome. And Sam, good to see you here. I know what your interests are, but maybe the others would like to say hello to you.
Oh, do you? Yeah, hi, I'm Sam. I'm down on Ngunnawal Ngambri country, a bit outside Canberra. I have various different interests in this sort of thing, but basically spent a long time putting energy into a single piece of land, and then shit hits the fan as it does, and then got to walk away with nothing, and now I get to restart. And so looking at different ways of doing it, and with security, I guess, or some sort of security and future proofing for the people who are putting into the land, not just for the capitalist owners within the current system that we participate in. And also have big interest in tiny house stuff and community living stuff, and also Indigenous rights and land rights. And yeah,
Great.
so I'm here.
Good to see you here, Sam. And Eliza and Lucy are both also on the National Committee, but would you both like to say hello and anything you might like to add before we come back to Michele for some thinking forward?
Hello.
Eliza.
I'm cooking dinner as well. Hi everyone. I'm on the committee of AFSA, and I'm also a market gardener on hiatus that's been leasing land for 5 years. And so I've always been interested in alternative land models, and just kind of have struggled with the ramifications of really badly run privatized land. And so I've always really kind of wanted to seek out, alternative ways of making agricultural land more accessible to especially young farmers coming through. So thanks to everyone for coming.
Thanks, Liz. Good to see you here.
Hi, Eliza, I am also cooking dinner. I'm not able to be a very active participant this evening. I've got a little bit of other stuff going on, but here to listen and learn from other people's experiences, and just really interested in continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Lucy. Good to see you here as well. So there's actually a report we were going to share. We shared this in the last land session, but because there's some new people here tonight, Jess, we should probably share the land squeeze report from EPAS Food. And then there's that access to land. Michele, was it you who shared that one with us from the EU? And then there was a video about accessing land in the EU. And then it took me to, I only just found it today. There's a whole access to land, EU platform that's really advocating very strongly. Gordon, this will be of definite interest to you over there if you haven't seen it already. I just found it today, so I haven't actually looked through it, but I just think it's interesting to us to see what other measures people are taking.
Yeah, I definitely think that this Agrarian Trust project is very much just one of the many measures that you can take to improve access to farmland and affordability and security of tenure, and being able to build equity in improvements that you make. Because as Tammi said, and as we've discussed, there's a much larger policy framework and initiatives like SAFER in France, which Antoine, who I think is on the AFSA committee, has alerted us all to, are larger kind of policy platforms. This is a small kind of targeted initiative. yeah, I think it's really worthwhile doing. So I guess I'm on the lookout for people that know about possible philanthropics with this kind of granting goal. I'm also interested to hear if any of you are in areas where there are local community foundations, because they are often a good source of funds. So community foundations are typically, we have one here on the Moreton Peninsula. It's called the Moreton Peninsula Community Foundation. It's basically a vehicle for donors to give money to a set of causes that are predetermined by the foundation's remit, basically, and it's quite broad. To address disadvantage, really, is kind of what the Moreton Peninsula Community Foundation does. And I've been thinking about that avenue of funding, which is basically funding from place-based charities, or place-based giving charities like the Moreton Peninsula Community Foundation. I think there's one in Ballarat, there's one in Geelong. And the kind of conceptual hurdle here is that we're thinking of the Agrarian Trust as a two-tier body, right? We would have a peak entity that has the mission lock on everything. And then you would have these regional commons that would be the land holding entities, or at the very least hold long-term secure leases to the land. So if you're going to be trying to get money from place-based foundations, you're going to have to make a case that what you're doing has some very strong link to a place. So we could think in the reverse, and we could go, do we have a piece of land in a particular area that we think would be a good fit for the Agrarian Trust? Do we have some farmers that want to farm it? Can we put together a plan for that piece of land? And then can we go to a community foundation, a local, like Moreton Peninsula Foundation, if the land's in the Moreton Peninsula, and go, give us money to set the whole shebang up. So the 43,000 to do the legal structuring, because this is what we want to do. And this is our pilot project, and it fits in with your remit because it's local, because it's to do with the environment, because that's sort of where my head's at the moment. Those two avenues, either just find another philanthropic like the NRCT, which there are a few, we can do that. We've got the grant already written, but we could also kind of think the other way.
I mean, I like the other way. It's much more kind of food sovereignty and agroecology, starting with place-based solutions, and it starts with relations. So I actually think that's really good thinking. And immediately my mind went to so many of the areas that we've been talking with where land prices have just skyrocketed, and they're all, if not peri-urban, very close to being peri-urban. And I can't imagine parcels of land that we're going to be able to secure. It'd be easier, like what we were talking about before, of identifying retiring farmers and how to support that model into the trust.
Yep.
As opposed to a land purchase. And we actually have one of those. So Bridie and Tom from Kinsfolk Farm, they're down on that retiree farm. They're not even retired, I don't think, but sharing. But no, maybe that's not. Anyway, they would be an interesting one to talk with.
And the other thing I was thinking too was that if you can get a community foundation like the Moreton Peninsula Foundation, like Northern Rivers Foundation, to fund the setup of an Agrarian Trust based on a proposal for a pilot project that's in their area, then the other advantage of that is if people want to give money to this project before we've even set the entities up or land, they can give it to that community foundation to hold it for us while we set up the entities. And the way that would happen legally is that that community foundation, all they need to do is set up what's called a sub-fund that's specifically for us.
Right. So it's like quarantined for this.
Yep. So I'll give you an example of where that's happened. So in Byron Bay Shire Council has just funded the establishment of a Byron Bay Community Land Trust. And their remit, the remit of this trust, which won't be council controlled, is affordable housing, basically, in Byron Bay. They were able to set this trust up with funds. So a piece of land was donated to this project even before the Byron Bay Community Land Shire Council had been set up, which is what I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the land was given to a sub-fund of the Northern Rivers Community Foundation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the Northern Rivers Community Foundation held that piece of land and money to set up the Byron Bay Community Land Trust in this sub-fund structure. And the reason Northern Rivers Community Foundation did that is because it met their remit. They're a place-based giving foundation. And the pilot project that they actually gave to was in Byron Bay, and anyway.
Yeah, and they have a massive housing crisis. So
obviously, it's pretty much the same as the Mornington Peninsula, the same kind of situation. Yeah.
Yeah. So then the other part of that puzzle that you mentioned is having farmers people ready to farm, because
yes,
in that place.
Yes, absolutely. So the more I think about this, the more I kind of think this is sort of like what the US Agrarian Trust is now doing, even though they've already set up their peak entities and so they've already got their peak entities. So when I contacted them a year or so ago and I said, how do you establish new regional commons, right? So they're establishing new regional commons in different states. They've got one in Virginia that holds 2 pieces of land, one in Minnesota. And the answer was, don't even think about establishing a commons until you've got your piece of land and your community that wants to farm it. So they're sort of working like that already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, that's interesting. Mornington might actually be a really interesting example for that. You've also got Yoki Doki down there looking for permanent land.
Yeah.
And they're actually, they are established farmers who've always leased and who now have an insecure tenure situation.
Absolutely.
And they're known to be good farmers. So that also makes them kind of trustworthy. People will have confidence in the marriage, of land to them, if we could.
Absolutely. And Yoki Doki are well known to the council, or they're well known.
I know. Yeah. Well, that sounds like an interesting avenue to pursue. And I feel like we could, there's a whole, I always forget we're being recorded. I was about to say something differently than I'm going to say it now. There are lots of people with money and land who we might like to access on the peninsula.
On the peninsula, I don't see why the Mornington Peninsula Foundation isn't more interested in this. I've approached them, but that's still an ongoing conversation, because it seems to me that that fits in. But as I say, they would have to jump over the hurdle that at this stage our grant application to the NRCT didn't have any place-based stuff. It was help us set up this national organisation, and then we'll set up these regional ones.
So instead we take this as look for a pilot project on the Mornington and develop the governance model starting on the land that it's on, with the people that are in relations.
You would have, I still think that you would have to apply for funds to do both at the same time. You would have to apply for the funds to set up a legal structure for both the peak entity and your pilot regional commons. You couldn't just ask for the commons. I don't think. I could be, look, that's maybe just because my head's in the space that it's been in with that US model, but I can't at the moment, although I'm open to suggestions, I can't see how you would say, give us money to set up a regional commons on the Mornington Peninsula when we don't have a mission lock company to help us down the track when we set up the next commons somewhere else, right?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. I live in the world of reading the book, The Revolution Will Not Be Funded, and I'm like, come on, you guys, just
give us money.
Just let us do this. We always do the stuff we say we're going to do. Just takes us longer because we're all volunteers.
Yeah.
I think those are super interesting ideas, and I really like that idea of going back to a place-based approach as opposed to starting from a national approach. But there's just
I think I think we have to do both. I think we have to do both, but yeah, both at the same time. Yeah.
I agree with you. Thoughts from any of the others here about this? This is great. It's like this is one of the ways I love these solidarity sessions to work, whether it's actually just a giant brainstorming session. Gordon, yeah.
Well, one of the things that we're grappling with, and it was mentioned sort of by someone briefly, was the question is, how do you encourage young or younger people with a farming background, or perhaps no farming background? How do you encourage them to enter this space and not be so consumed with high return wages to own their own homes and all that sort of thing, which we're grappling with? How do you actually find these people and give them a sense that it could work for them as older farmers retire?
I mean, I have views on that because I've had about 60 young interns come through this place. But I'd actually throw it over probably to Ben as an aspiring young would-be farmer to think about how do we lure them away from the trappings of the capitalist city, where they think that, you need to earning more and having a mortgage is better than earning less and being on the land.
Yeah, it's the $1 million question, right? I feel like there's multiple parts to it. Like, obviously there's one that Tammi mentioned there about the sort of like the cultural idea of like what it means to live well, that does need shifting, and just understanding that farming is actually something that young people can do. But I think at the same time, there's also like the political economic aspect of it, that for it to be attractive, we also need like public policies that support small scale farmers to exist, and also the sort of like surrounding infrastructure in regional areas to attract people to be there. Like, a lot of small scale farming exists in like high amenity regions in Australia. So without that public infrastructure, you also don't get small scale farming really existing. So I think there's multiple parts to it that is not straightforward. And also, like, people around the world are asking the same thing of like, how do we get young people to stop migrating to the city from the countryside? Like, it's a global problem. So
Sure
it's
is,
tricky.
yeah. I mean, in Japan, they pay them. It's like they give the young farmers a UBI. Is one of the ways they do it, because they're so desperate for some young people to farm.
And I think like a UBI is a great solution there, because it takes away the stress of having to make ends meet from working the land and getting paid nothing for it. So yeah, I think UBI is a.
I think we're also kind of talking about the solution, right? There are so many young farmers who want to be farming and who would be doing it if they had access to land and if they had the security of having ongoing access to land. So, like, this is one of the biggest reasons why young people aren't farming in the ways that they would like to be. It's not necessarily just that young people want to live in a city and have a house. It's that I can live in a city and rent a house and have some level of security there. But without access to land, there's no level of security if I wanted to start farming.
Yeah, and then also the mentorship of farmers as you begin farming, if you haven't come from a farming background.
Yeah, yeah.
Having more of those farmer incubator kind of things in place.
Yeah, for sure. But if you have ongoing access to land and you know that you have enough time, and that gives you a safe space to fail almost as well. You sort of talked about how do we get people away from that high profit, high turnover mindset. If young farmers are going into that space and they don't have a safety net, then like I can absolutely understand why they'd why they'd be concerned about that.
And the safety net is like one of the most important things for our movement, because we don't want to just be attracting middle class would-be farmers. Like, this should be for everyone, and not only if you have the means to get into it. And Legion, to your question about the regional infrastructure, I think Ben was actually talking about some of the things like transport and other sort of amenities that make it good to live in a region. But then there's the other side of farming infrastructure of processing and distribution channels for your produce. So those are it's like the living amenities and then the farming amenities, infrastructure.
And also,
I mean,
like,
even here where we're a high amenity area, our transport is horrendous. So
Yeah.
for young people, they find it really difficult because they can't just jump on a bus or a train and get around the place. And that's something that all the shires should be addressing.
Yeah, and it's also a bit of like a self-perpetuating problem with like proximity and access to markets as well, because you know, a lot of these regions are like close to a city, so you have like that market to access. But in rural areas that are in decline, you have a decreasing population, so you have a shrinking market. So it's kind of this like, yeah, it's bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. That's quite interesting. I mean, yes, definitely the huge problems there, and I believe those issues cannot be addressed overnight. And the problem with the both state and local governments, they probably not aware of this kind of issues as well, because they're always reluctant to provide unless they know the problems become so severe. So I think maybe there's some kind of channel can be established to let the government, both local, state, even federal government, to invest more funding in terms of regional infrastructure. I mean, transport networks are both the responsibilities for local shires, local government, state government, even funding from the federal government. So they can play a huge role if they know something needed. And in terms of the other issues, processing, Ben mentioned, and are you referring to like more like a manufacturing or?
No, it's actually like stuff that AFSA has been advocating around for a long time, like abattoirs and dairy processing and grain mills, all of the things to further process the primary produce so that you can sell it directly to people in the local community.
Yeah. Okay. Is the hub something similar? Shared facilities available to local areas?
There's very little of that sort of thing around, and it's what we've been working on. If you actually, Legion, if you drop me an email, I can send you my thesis, which has one of the chapters is an article called "The Intrinsic Infrastructure of Agroecology," and it's actually talking about the loss of that infrastructure and the collectivizing that we're all doing to try and rebuild it in our local communities. It's a huge problem here, but most of our processing facilities are increasingly owned by multinationals. So we're losing access.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, there's actually lots of problems talked about here. I think it's quite similar to Coffs Harbour. It's every aspect is similar, you know, like lacking infrastructure, lacking transport networks. So like some farmers told me that they don't have import trucks. Like duopoly from woolies and coals have been cut off their supply to food to consumers directly. They have to ship or truck all the food directly to Sydney instead, which is likely to cause lots of huge waste and big loss during this process. And one of the things the CRC been trying to do is establishing a hub. That's the goal, to bring the shared possibility like infrastructure or even just facilities for people willing to use, or even some training. So maybe that's some ideas can be used to for your areas as well. I'll
Yeah,
send
if
an
you,
email as well. Yeah.
yeah, if you will, Jess has put the link to that particular article there in the chat. But also, if you have a look at the People's Food Plan, you'll see that we've analyzed the problem pretty extensively and provided a lot of policy suggestions of ways forward for that kind of reclaiming of local infrastructure. I mean, we live in a country who subsidizes export, massively, and does not subsidize local and regional infrastructure. You know, where
It's terrible.
you hear
Yeah.
terms like paddock to port instead of paddock to plate. You know, so it's a tricky environment.
It's terrible. Yes.
Yeah, Dick here, look, just in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, where I'm at, with climate change and the flooding that we get here, we're having to start retreating from the floodplains, particularly in cities where houses have been built on floodplains, but even in peri-urban areas. So there is potentially a lot of floodplain land, which is often quite good agricultural land, that's going to have to change use over the next generation or so quite dramatically. And, we're on Northey Street City Farms on one of those floodplains in Brisbane, and we've given a bit of thought to this about how more of that land could be set aside or provided for peri-urban and urban farming. And it'd have to be not the really scour, the really fast, but you get a lot of floodplains where there's backwaters and you get inundation, but it doesn't sort of totally take away all the topsoil. The other problem, of course, is that in urban areas, some of that land is contaminated, like with lead and other heavy metals and so on.
Yep.
But it's just an opportunity that I think we could be putting pressure on local governments, as they, in Brisbane anyway, are resuming houses on floodplains and just turning them to open parkland, but rather look at providing them for farmers who want to farm them and providing a bit of support in the way of sort of infrastructure and so on.
But to your point, it has challenges, right? Eliza, who was with us earlier, has actually had to withdraw from farming on floodplain where she is in southern New South Wales, on the coast there, because they got inundated 3 years in a row after a year of fires. And so it's just those areas are getting so risky even to farm on. So it's hard. That stuff is really hard. And it's not going to get any easier, as we all know, with climate change. So I think that's one thing too, though, with our kind of farming is reframing the entire idea of valuable agricultural land, because smallholders are pretty good at turning what is not considered very valuable into valuable, but also we can't let them keep calling valuable agricultural land something that is for large scale broadacre farming, like that it's not for smallholders. So we have a whole bunch of land use issues to kind of address in terms of what size farm is appropriate for farming and what policy should be supporting in small scale farming. All of our members farm on quite small lots, and they can be dotted all over the place if land use planning kind of supported that model. So again, that's work AFSA does do already. Now it's just the question of how do we get our hands on some more land and get some more people onto it. And we'll keep chipping away with I see we're coming up to time. We'll keep chipping away with the land sharing as we go. But I think this idea, we lost Michele. I saw one drop away before, but it was Michele. I think Michelle's point about thinking back to doing it from the ground up is very much AFSA's general theory of change. And so I've been a bit uncomfortable with our work around looking for funding for the project because of it's kind of not how we do things, but as soon as you get lawyers involved, nobody gives you enough for free. Everyone else is willing to do a bunch of things for free. But weird, lawyers not so much. And none of the ones on our team, like Michele is actually a lawyer, but none of the ones on the team have like the particular expertise we need for this sort of law. And so what we need are just some really nice, generous lawyers who would do like the rest of us and work for free for a better world for everyone,
So what's like the actual law field expertise?
I think the main one we need right now is corporations law. because it's about the governance model. And so, yeah, we don't have it. And how weird, isn't it? The corporate law seems to attract the least pro bono. I suspect that's not a coincidence. Because we get a lot of support in planning and environment law from various lawyers, but yeah, corporate law, not so much. So yeah, I think she's right though. And we know we actually do have some, yeah, that's right, Legion, there are for sure. I think it does get quite complicated when you start talking about the governance models and trust, land held in trust. We're not a charitable organization, like we're not for profit, but we don't have DGR status. So all of these moving pieces are pretty complicated law, actually. I still think we could do it for less than $43,000. Somebody could help us figure out this model without having to spend that much money on more lawyers. But maybe the place-based thing has to involve a place-based retired lawyer, like maybe that's what we're looking for, is that relation in one place. And I think there are a lot of them on the Mornington Peninsula. I feel like this is a good place to look, So I think we're going to pursue some of that. And the context we have down there, we helped launch their agroecology strategy last year. We were part of the consultation process, and we're in very good relations with that shire. So I think it could be a good place to start in terms of talking. They have an agroecology officer, the only one in Australia that does. So we might talk with Sarah about connecting with some of the landholders and would-be farmers, or like Yoki Doki, who are farming and need land, and then do some outreach to see if there are some retired corporate lawyers who are interested in that shire and its kind of future farming. So I think those are some good ideas. I love that much more than finding the next philanthropist to go begging for money from. So
I think from memory, they might actually be really on board with tiny housing as well, Tam, which
yeah,
we've spoken about the housing issue heaps of times. So yeah, that's another.
it's true. Yeah, no, they've been quite progressive of late. And I mean, because I think a lot of these shires that are in total crisis around housing and agricultural land, the two seem to happen a lot in these peri-urban shires. Yeah, they've got to do something about it, right? Michelle has just given her apologies that she got kicked off and can't get back in. But that's all right. It's 7:29, so I think that's our cue to go have our dinner for those who haven't during the session or before. And I've really appreciated the newcomers here too with some thoughts, and I just think it's really spurred more creative and lateral thinking, having more people in the space that haven't come before. And that's the point of solidarity sessions. Like, it's really about that building out horizontal knowledge networks, connections, and having more creative ideas coming in from different quarters. So this has been really useful, I think, for our development of the Agrarian Trust model. Thanks for coming. And if you're not already subscribed, like, to the newsletter, or if you're not a member of AFSA, you obviously should be. But sign up at least for the newsletter so that you see as we make further developments, when that's happening and you can tap back in. And yeah, always happy to talk policy with Gordon, anyone who's wanting to do that. Very interested in seeing some real policy reform in this country around land and water. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Jess, for madly